The bullet hit the car window, 3 inches from Naomi's face before she even heard the sound. Glass exploded inward in a shower of diamonds, and she was already moving. Not because she had a plan, not because Tae-min had told her to, but because her body had learned something in the last 72 hours that her mind was still catching up to. It had learned that stillness was a choice and not always the right one. She dropped across the back seat, pulled Cho-yeon down with her, and pressed her palm flat against the floor of the vehicle as a second impact hit the door panel with a sound like a fist through sheet metal. "Down," Tae-min said from the front seat. He wasn't asking. The car was already moving. He had seen them first, 2 black sedans pulling out of the parking structure across from the airport arrivals lane at an angle that was not accidental. He had clocked them before the first shot because he had spent 20 years translating for men who moved exactly like this. And he knew the geometry of an ambush the way a musician knows a chord change before it lands. He had the car in reverse before the door opened, in drive before the first window shattered. And now he was threading a 3-lane road at 60 miles per hour in the wrong direction with his jaw set and his eyes doing the thing they did when he had reduced the situation to its essential mathematics and was simply executing the solution. "How many?" Cho-yeon said from the back seat. She was not panicking. She was asking for data. 2 vehicles. From men minimum. Possibly 6. He cut hard left between an airport shuttle and a concrete barrier. The sedan behind them clipped the barrier and kept coming. "My grandfather moved fast. He knew about the filing," Cho-yeon said. "He knew before the filing." Tae-min checked the mirror. He has been watching the lawyer's office since 2019. The moment Baek Jisoo opened the deposit box, he had people in the air. A pause. A hard right that threw Naomi against the door. "I miscalculated. I thought we had 48 hours. We had 6. Naomi sat up from the back seat floor and looked at the city coming at them through the fractured windshield. Philadelphia. She had been gone for less than 3 days, and it already looked like a place she was seeing for the first time. The familiar grid of streets carrying a weight it hadn't carried before. Every corner holding something she now understood differently. She reached under the seat and found what she was looking for. A metal tool case. She had noticed it on the way to the airport. She had not asked what was in it. She opened it now. Inside was a satellite phone, a hard drive the size of a deck of cards, and a folded document she recognized immediately. The original co-authorship affidavit in Park Soon-hee's handwriting, sealed in a clear protective sleeve. "Backup copy," Tae-min said without turning around. "My grandmother prepared 3. 1 with Baek Jisoo, 1 in the laboratory, 1 in the car." Naomi held the affidavit in her hands and felt the weight of it. Not the paper weight, which was nothing, but the other kind. 30 years of one woman's patience and precision and absolute refusal to let the truth disappear, condensed into 14 pages of handwriting and a notary seal. The second sedan pulled level with them on the highway. "Hold on," Tae-min said. He braked hard, let the sedan overshoot, then cut across 2 lanes into the exit ramp, so fast the tires left sound on the asphalt. The sedan couldn't make the cut. It blew past the exit and was gone. The first vehicle was still behind them, further back now, recalibrating. "We need to get off the road," Cho-yeon said. "I know where to go," Naomi said. Both of them looked at her. "There's someone who needs to know we're back," she said. "And I think it's time we stopped making decisions without him." She was talking about Malik. They found him where she knew he would be. The community center on 49th Street, where he had worked every Saturday since he was 19 years old, running the after-school program, teaching kids from the block the kind of practical skills their schools had stopped funding. Woodworking, basic electronics, how to read a lease, how to understand what you were signing before you signed it. Big Mike had insisted on it. Malik had never stopped. He was in the woodworking room when they came through the back entrance, standing at a workbench with sawdust on his forearms and a bruise on his cheekbone that had gone from purple to the specific yellow-green of something 3 days into healing. He looked up when the door opened. He saw Naomi first. Something moved across his face that was not guilt and not relief and not the performance of either. It was rawer than that, more fundamental, the specific expression of a person who has been holding something alone for so long that the arrival of someone who can share it produces a feeling too large for a single word. "Close the door," he said. Naomi closed it. He looked at Taemin, then at Cho-Yun, at her face, at the specific architecture of it, at the ways it matched and didn't match the face of his sister. He looked for a long time. Then he sat down on a workbench stool and put his hands flat on his thighs and said, "How much do you know?" "Everything," Naomi said. "Now you tell me the part one don't." Malik looked at his hands. He looked at the sawdust on them. He looked like a man deciding whether to put down something very heavy that he has been carrying so long he has forgotten what his arms feel like without it. "Junho came to me 6 weeks ago," he said. "Before Dad died. He knew about the formula. He knew about the ledger. He knew about the garden." He paused. He didn't know about the roots cellar. He didn't know about Cho-Yun. And he didn't know that I already knew what he was going to offer before he offered it. He looked at Naomi. "I grew up in the same house you did, Naomi. I watched Dad tend that garden for 30 years. I read the ledger when I was 17. I found it in the false bottom of the filing cabinet in the back office. He let that land. I have known what we were sitting on since I was 17 years old." The woodworking room was very quiet. "He never told me," Naomi said. "Dad asked me not to." His voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of something that had been built deliberately over many years. "He said the ledger was yours to find. He said when the time came you would be ready, and I would know it because the other key would have arrived." He looked at Taemin. "When Junho came to me, I knew the time had come. I just didn't know which side Junho was on yet." "You were running a play," Taemin said. "It was not a question. I let them take me," Malik said. "I let them put me on that FaceTime call. I let them show you the bruise. They gave it to me willingly, by the way, that didn't have to try very hard to find a reason. And while they were watching me make that call, I was in their system." He reached into his jacket and produced a hard drive identical to the one in Taemin's tool case. 6 weeks of their internal communications. Financial records. The names of every lawyer, every legislator, every customs official they have on payroll on both sides of the Pacific. He said it on the bench. Junho's grandfather is not just a patent thief. He is the anchor investor in a network of 17 shell companies that have been laundering the formula's profits through textile manufacturing contracts across 4 countries for 30 years. He looked at them all. The patent filing is the beginning. This is the case. Naomi stared at the hard drive. She thought about her father at his desk with a cup of sweet tea still warm beside him. She thought about the things he had known and the weight of knowing them and the way he had organized his entire life around protecting his children from that weight until they were ready to carry it. He had known Malik was ready at 17. He had waited for her. She was ready now. "We need a lawyer," she said. "Not Baek, Jisoo. She is compromised the moment my grandfather's people traced the filing back to her." Taemin was already on the satellite phone. "We need a journalist. Someone international. Someone with a platform large enough that the moment this story is public, it becomes too expensive to suppress." He looked at Malik. "Do you have press contacts?" "I have someone better," Malik said. He picked up his phone and made a call. 3 rings. Then a woman's voice, sharp and clear, and carrying the specific quality of someone who has been waiting for exactly this call. "It's Malik Washington," he said. "Tell Congresswoman Park that the bridge is open. She'll know what it means." Taemin went very still. "Congresswoman Park," he said slowly. "Park Seo-Yun, the Trade Committee. My grandmother's niece," Cho-Yun said quietly. "I wondered when she would come into this." "You knew about her," Taemin said. "My mother told me. Before she died." Cho-Yun looked at the hard drive on the bench. Park Seo-Yun has been on the Korean Trade Committee for 11 years. She has been building a case against Taemin's grandfather's company for 9 of those 11 years. She has never had enough. She has been waiting for the original co-authorship documentation and the living botanical specimen. She paused. She's been waiting for us. The satellite phone in Taemin's hand buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Korean country code. He answered it. Taemin. His grandfather's voice. 68 years old. The specific authority of someone who had spent 6 decades being the most powerful person in every room. Not angry. Worse than angry. Calm. "I think it's time we spoke directly. Without translators." The irony landed on all of them simultaneously. The silent translator. The man who had spent 20 years speaking for his grandfather in every room. Now his grandfather was calling him directly because there was no one left to send. I agree, Tae-min said. His voice was completely level. Where? Philadelphia. The restaurant block. What is left of it? A pause. Come alone. I won't be alone, Tae-min said. The longest silence of the conversation. No, his grandfather said finally. I don't suppose you will. The line went dead. The four of them looked at each other across the woodworking room. The sawdust on the bench between them. The hard drive sitting in the middle of it like a detonator, waiting for someone to decide whether to press the button or walk away. Nobody walked away. They went to the block at midnight. Big Mike's soul pit was a skeleton. The brick walls standing, the roof gone, the interior a landscape of charred wood and broken glass, and a specific gray of things that have burned and cooled and become something else. The smell of it hit Naomi from half a block away, and she stopped walking for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds to let it be what it was. Then she kept moving. Han Jae-Won was standing in what had been the restaurant's entrance, between two men whose size and stillness identified their function without requiring elaboration. He was shorter than she had imagined. Tae-min's grandfather, the architect of everything that had been taken, standing in the ruins of what he had ordered burned with the specific composure of someone who has never once in his life been required to stand in the wreckage of his own decisions. Until now, he looked at Tae-min first, then Naomi, then Cho-yeon. And something happened in his face when he saw Cho-yeon that he could not control, the involuntary response of a man seeing evidence of something he had paid to have erased, standing alive and unheard in front of him in an olive field jacket with her mother's eyes. He recovered quickly, but they all saw it. You filed the affidavit, he said to Tae-min, not an accusation. A statement of a fact that had changed the shape of everything. I filed it, Tae-min said. You understand what this means for the family? Yes. For you personally? Yes. Han Jae-Won looked at him for a long time. Your grandmother, he said, and then stopped. Started again. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. He said it the way people say things they mean completely and have never once said out loud before. I did not think she would find a way to reach past her death. I underestimated her. He looked at the hard drive in Malik's hand. He knew what it was. And I underestimated your brother, he said to Naomi. That is twice in one family. That is not a mistake I have made before. You stole from us, Naomi said. Her voice was completely steady. Not cold, not performative, just accurate. For 30 years, you took the money that belonged to two families and you built an empire with it, and you told yourself a story that made it acceptable. I don't need you to confess that. The affidavit does that. The financial records do that. Congresswoman Park's committee does that. She took one step toward him. What I need you to understand, standing in what is left of my father's restaurant, is that we are not offering you a negotiation. We are offering you a choice. Han Jae-Won looked at her with the specific attention of someone recalibrating a calculation in real time. What choice, he said. You can contest the patent filing, Naomi said. You can spend the next 10 years in litigation while Malik's evidence makes its way through 4 jurisdictions and Congresswoman Park's committee goes public with 17 shell companies. You can watch the empire your grandfather built become the story that defines your family name for the next 100 years. She paused. Or you can settle. Full restitution. Both families. The living specimen stays in our possession. The formula is jointly registered in the original inventors' names, Big Mike Washington and Park Soon-hee, retroactive to 1988. And you walk away from the litigation with enough dignity intact that your grandchildren won't have to change their names. The two men flanking Han Jae-Won shifted. He raised one hand, fractionally, and they went still. He looked at Tae-min. Is this your offer or hers? It's ours, Tae-min said. All of ours, Cho-yeon said. Han Jae-Won looked at the three of them. The South Philadelphia chef, the silent translator, the woman from beneath the DMZ, standing in the ruins of the thing he had burned, holding everything he needed them not to have, offering him the only exit that didn't end in a courtroom. He looked at Naomi for a long time. Your father, he said, would have made the same offer. I know, Naomi said. He was better at this than either of us. He spent 30 years being patient about it. She held his gaze. I have been patient for 72 hours. I am done being patient. What is your answer? Han Jae-Won looked at the burnt walls of Big Mike's soul pit, at the sky showing through where the roof had been, at the place where a woman had stirred her father's gravy for 20 years without knowing what was in it or what it meant or what it would cost and what it would reclaim. He straightened his jacket. He looked at his grandson. Call Baek Jisoo, he said quietly. Tell her we accept the terms. Then he turned and walked out of the ruins into the Philadelphia night with his 2 men behind him and did not look back, and the sound of his footsteps on the wet asphalt faded into the sound of the city, and then there was only the rain. The 4 of them stood in the burnt shell of Big Mike's soul pit and did not speak and did not move and let the rain fall through the open roof onto the charred floor around them, and the silence was not empty. It was full. It was the fullest silence any of them had ever stood inside of, and none of them wanted to be the first to break it, because breaking it would mean it was over, and none of them were ready for it to be over yet. Taemin spoke first. He looked at Naomi. He said the thing he had been building towards saying since the moment he laid a rusted key on a Formica counter and told a stranger they had 10 minutes. He said it quietly, in the specific way of someone who has spent 20 years saying nothing that belonged only to themselves and is saying this one thing for the first and only time with no translation required. Naomi looked at him. She didn't say anything back. She didn't need to. The translation between them had been fluent for 3 days, and this was the simplest sentence he had ever produced in any language. Malik looked at the ceiling that wasn't there and at the sky beyond it and said, nothing, because some moments don't require brothers to say anything at all. Cho-Yun looked at the gap in the kitchen wall where the burnt garden was and said, the garden. They walked through the gap together. Naomi found the cellar door under the ash and the new growth that had already begun pushing through in the 3 days since the fire. The particular insistence of roots that have decided to continue regardless of what happens to the surface. She opened it with the key that had been on her keyring for 20 years. The amber light rose from below. She climbed down, then Cho-Yun, then Taemin, then Malik, who stopped on a ladder and looked at the plant in the enclosure and made a sound that was very small and very private and belonged only to a man who has known a secret for 13 years and is finally in a room with the people who now know it with him. He used to come down here every morning, Malik said, before the kitchen opened, before anyone arrived. He would check on it, and then he would go upstairs and start the gravy. He looked at the amber flowers. I think he needed to see it every day, to remind himself that it was still there, that it had survived. Naomi looked at the plant, at the flowers the color of the formula, and the color of the gravy, and the color of the lamp in the jjimjilbang, and the color of the catalyst compound, and the color of a lantern moving through a sewer passage beneath the most heavily guarded land on Earth. Everything in this story had been the same color. Her father had been surrounded by it his entire life, had built his life around it, had fed the neighborhood with it, had hidden it and tended it and waited for the day his children were ready to know what they were standing on. She reached into the enclosure and touched one of the amber flowers. It was warm from the grow lamp. It was alive. Dad, she said quietly, not to anyone in the room, not as a prayer, just his name, said in a room where she finally understood everything he had ever done, because understanding the full weight of what someone has given you is the only way to properly receive it. Malik stood beside her and looked at the flowers and did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, he talked about you every day, you know, not the way parents talk about children when they want to sound like good parents. The way people talk about something they're proud of in a way that has nothing to do with themselves. He paused. He used to say, Naomi will know what to do when the time comes. She just needs to find the door. He looked at his sister. You found every door, Naomi. Every single one. She didn't respond with words. She put her arm around her brother's shoulders, and he leaned into it, and they stood like that in the amber light of their father's secret garden and let 30 years of accumulated weight shift. Not disappear. Weight like that does not disappear, but shift, redistribute, spread across 4 people instead of 1, become bearable in the way that things become bearable when they are no longer carried alone. Taemin stood at the edge of the enclosure and looked at the plant his grandmother had helped create 35 years ago in a laboratory in Seoul, the botanical compound she had spent the rest of her life trying to restore to its rightful place in history. He thought about her hands writing labels in a laboratory beneath the DMZ. He thought about the morning she had called him to her bedside 3 months ago and told him to find the girl with the silver ladle, and he had thought, standing at her bedside, that she was confused, that the medication and the age and the long weight of what she had been carrying had finally loosened her grip on the literal world. She had not been confused. She had been the clearest she had ever been in her life. She had been giving him his last assignment. He had completed it. He thought that was probably the thing she had wanted most. Not the settlement, not the patent restoration, not the congressional inquiry or the headline in the Korean newspaper or the shell companies named in 4 jurisdictions. She had wanted her grandson to complete one assignment that belonged entirely to himself. That was not in service of someone else's agenda. That was not a translation of someone else's meaning. That was simply Tae-min Han walking toward something real and arriving at it. He had arrived. Cho-yeon sat cross-legged on the root cellar floor with her back against the stone wall and her book open on her knee. The same dog-eared book she had carried on the plane, the same one she had been reading in the sewer before the lantern found them. And she was not reading it. She was looking at the plant. She was looking at the 4 people in this small underground room. She was looking at what a family looks like when it has survived everything that has been thrown at it and is still, improbably, standing in the same room at the same time, breathing the same warm amber air. She had not had this before. Not once in 30 years. Not the version with her mother, which had ended too soon. Not the version alone in the laboratory, which had been necessary, but was not this. Not the version she had imagined in the long, dark hours beneath the DMZ, when she had counted the days by the rhythm of the grow lamp's hum and told herself that the people with the other 2 keys were coming, and believed it with the specific faith of someone who has no other option but to believe it. This was the version she had believed in. This exact room, this exact light, these exact people. She closed the book. She put it in her jacket pocket. She looked at Naomi. "We should talk about the restaurant," she said. Naomi looked at her. "What about it?" "Your father built it in 1982, Cho-yeon said. "My mother's notes include the original business registration. He named it Big Mike Soul Pit because that was what the neighborhood called him, and he wanted the neighborhood to feel it was theirs." She paused. "The settlement terms include full financial restitution to both families retroactive to 1988. That is a significant sum. Enough to rebuild." She looked at the plant in the enclosure. "Enough to rebuild several times over." She looked at Naomi. "I think he would have wanted it rebuilt. He would have wanted it bigger," Malik said. "He would have wanted it on 2 continents, Tae-min said. And then, because nobody expected it from him, and because the dry humor arrived exactly as it always did, without warning at the moment it was most needed, he added, with a proper root cellar at each location. The laughter that came out of the 4 of them in that small underground room was the best sound any of them had made in 72 hours. It was not performed. It was not relief exactly, though it contained relief. It was the specific laughter of people who have been through something enormous together and are on the other side of it, and are finding, to their collective surprise, that the other side contains things worth laughing about. The patent settlement took 6 months. The congressional inquiry took 2 years. The formal restoration of Big Mike Washington and Park Soon-hee as co-inventors of the formula that had built a sector of the global textile industry took 3 court filings across 2 countries and a headline in a Korean newspaper that Cho-yeon read on her phone in a coffee shop in North Philadelphia, alone for the last time, because from that day forward she would not be alone in anything. Baek Jisoo filed the full shell company disclosure in 4 jurisdictions simultaneously on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, the story was in 17 news outlets across 3 continents. By Thursday, Han Jae-Won's lawyers had begun settlement negotiations in earnest. By the following Monday, the formula was jointly registered in the original inventors' names, Big Mike Washington and Park Soon-hee, retroactive to 1988, exactly as Naomi had required, standing in the burnt ruins of her father's restaurant in the Philadelphia rain. Junho Han read the settlement terms from a hotel room in Seoul, where he had been since the DMZ sewer, and said nothing to anyone for 4 days. On the fifth day, he called Taemin. Taemin answered. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. Nobody in either family ever learned what was said in it, but after it ended, Junho enrolled in a restorative justice program at a university in Busan and did not contact any of them again for 3 years, at which point he sent Naomi a letter that contained no request and no justification and simply said, I know what I inherited. I'm trying to earn something different. She read it once and filed it, and did not respond and did not need to. Congresswoman Park Seo-yeon delivered her committee findings on a Thursday in March. She named the 17 shell companies. She named the legislators on both sides of the Pacific. She named the customs officials and the lawyers and the financial instruments. She did not name Big Mike Washington or Park Soon-hee in the context of victims. She named them in the context of inventors. She said their names clearly and correctly and in the right order, and the record reflected them, and that more than the money and more than the patent and more than any of the rest of it was what 30 years of waiting had actually been for. The new restaurant opened 14 months after the fire. It was on the same corner, Baltimore Avenue and 52nd Street. The same brick, the same address, a new roof, a new kitchen with new burners and new cast iron pans, and a new shelf for the spice containers, and a new mounted television in the back office that nobody had plugged in yet because there was too much work to do. And on the back burner, in the largest pot the new kitchen owned, the gravy that had been simmering for 40 years started simmering again. Same recipe, same wooden spoon, the one Naomi had grabbed from the burning kitchen on the night this began, the one her father had carved from black walnut, the one that had been through a jjimjilbang and a sewer and a root cellar and a midnight confrontation and a burnt building and an airplane at 37,000 feet and had come back to this kitchen without a scratch on it. Because some things are built to last, and the people who build them know it. The neighborhood came. Of course it did. The neighborhood had always come. Some of them had been eating Big Mike's gravy for 30 years, and some of them had been eating it since before they could remember eating anything else, and all of them knew, without being told, that the woman standing at the back burner, stirring, it was her father's daughter in every way that mattered, and in some ways it had taken the rest of the world 30 years to formally acknowledge. Taemin was at a table by the window. Cho-yeon was in the back booth with her book, a new one this time. The dog-eared one finally finished on a Tuesday in February on the same couch where Naomi was sitting when she read Junho's letter. Malik was behind the counter. The community center kids were at 2 tables in the corner making enough noise for twice their number. Naomi stirred the gravy. She stirred it slow and clockwise with the flat wooden spoon the way her father had taught her. The kitchen smelled the way it had always smelled, rendered pork fat and scorched onion and that deeper, older thing she had never been able to name. She had a name for it now. It was called legacy. It was called the specific smell of something built to outlast the people who built it. It was called Big Mike Washington and Park Soon-hee standing back to back in front of a burning building in 1992, deciding that what they had made together was worth protecting and being right about it for 30 years until the children arrived to prove them right. She stirred the gravy. Outside the window, Baltimore Avenue moved through its Saturday afternoon the way it always had. The block party bay somewhere in the middle distance, the particular light of a West Philadelphia afternoon falling gold and amber across the wet asphalt. The neighborhood going about its life in the way that neighborhoods go about their lives when they are loved properly. The gravy was the same color it had always been, the same depth, the same warmth. It would take exactly as long as it always took, and it would taste exactly as it always tasted, and this time, the whole world would know what was in it. The bridge between Seoul and Philly was complete. The inheritance was home, and in a root cellar 2 blocks away, in a climate-controlled glass enclosure with a grow lamp that had never once been turned off, the most valuable plant on Earth put out another amber flower and kept growing. Now, if you stayed all the way to the end of Part 3, you are exactly the person this story was made for. You watched Naomi go from a woman stirring gravy in a dead man's kitchen to a woman standing in the ruins of everything that tried to stop her and offering the man who burned it down the only exit that didn't end in his complete destruction. You watched Malik reveal 13 years of patience and a hard drive worth more than $5 million. You watched Tae-min say the thing he had been building towards saying since the very first scene. And you watched Cho-Yun close her book and put it in her pocket because she had finally found something better than reading alone in the dark. And you know that this universe is not finished. Because Congresswoman Park's inquiry named 17 shell companies, and not all of them have been traced. Because Tae-min's grandfather accepted the settlement terms, but Han Jae-Won has never in 68 years accepted anything without a contingency. And because somewhere in this story there is a document that Cho-Yun's mother carried out of North Korea in the lining of her jacket in 1993, 37 pages of botanical compound research, and only 35 of those pages have been accounted for. 2 pages are still missing. So here's what you do right now. Subscribe to Sarangi&Soul. Hit the notification bell. Because when Part 4 drops, it is dropping without a countdown and without a warning, and the people who are not subscribed are going to find out about it 3 days late in someone else's comment section, while the rest of us are already in the next chapter. Scroll down to the comments right now and tell me the moment that broke you open in Part 3. Was it Malik sitting down and saying, "I have known since I was 17"? Was it Han Jae-Won saying your grandmother was a remarkable woman and meaning every word of it? Was it the gravy starting again on the same burner? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment, and I want to know which moment got you. Like this video, if the root cellar scene in the dark with all 4 of them made you feel something you were not expecting to feel at the end of a thriller. Share it with one person who needs a story that sounds like nothing they have ever heard. And if you're watching The Inheritance for the first time, go back to Part 1. You came in at the end of something that started 30 years before any of us knew we were in it. The inheritance is home. The gravy is on the burner. The grow lamp is still running. And 2 pages are still missing. Part 4. We are nowhere near done.